Good afternoon and welcome to today's RIT webinar, part of a series created exclusively for RIT alumni. I'm Lydia Palmer, Senior Director of Marketing and Communications in the Division of Development and Alumni Relations, and I'm your moderator for today's webinar. Before we begin, let's take a moment to make sure that everyone is ready and familiar with the presentation tools. All participants in today's webinar have joined in mute mode and cannot be heard during the presentation. However, we absolutely encourage participation. To submit your questions at any time, please enter them in the chat box. The chat box can be opened by clicking on the chat tab at the right of your Livestorm window. We will make every effort to address all your comments and questions throughout the webinar. You are joining today's webinar using broadcast audio. If for any reason you wish to dial in by phone, dial-in information is provided in the chat box. Live captioning is being provided during this webinar, and you can find the link to access that in the chat box as well. Note that today's webinar will be recorded and made available, complete with captions, in approximately 2 weeks following today's event. All participants will receive an email with the link to the recording. If you have any technical questions, please feel free to type those into the chat box as well, and we will do our best to get you the appropriate answers. And with that, let's get started. Today's webinar is Celebrate Food. Our guest presenter is Kirby Bransforte, 2012 alumna with a degree in nutrition management from RIT's Wegman School of Health and Nutrition. After graduating from RIT, Kirby completed her dietetic internship at Cornell University and is now a registered dietitian nutritionist and a corporate nutritionist for Wegmans Food Markets based in Rochester, New York. Since her childhood, Kirby struggled with her weight and relationship with food. As an adult, she has found a passion for nutrition after making changes to her own lifestyle and felt drawn towards working with others to help them find their own path to good health. Kirby, thank you so much for joining us today. Our audience is all yours.
Thank you so much, Lydia. I am very, very, very excited to be here today, both as a proud RIT graduate and representative of Wegmans, and just super excited to share with you all some of the things that I've actually found personally helpful through my work as a dietitian and as a Wegmans employee that have helped me with my own relationship with food that I just absolutely love to share with others. So what we'd like to do today is kind of give an overview of general nutrition and healthy eating, because it really does help us to level set and kind of speak from a common playing field, and then dive into these healthy habits that we found that really work for everyone as we all try to improve our pattern of eating and relationship with food, talking about some of these habits that doesn't matter where you're starting from, what your food preferences are, we found that they're really beneficial for all folks. And then take a little time to talk about some practical tips for actually using some of this information. So before we get started, I'll draw your attention over to our poll tab here, because I'd really like you to take a guess how many results you think you'd get if you did an internet search on the term healthy eating. We actually did this a while back, and we know that there's a lot of information out there about healthy eating. It can be very conflicting, it can be confusing, often counterintuitive. And so we know that folks just get confused and are kind of left feeling, what is it that I should be eating? So if you did submit your vote, if you were guessed over 600 million results, you would be right. So we know that people are just confused out there, and healthy eating, it's a funny thing. Nutrition is it's a kind of a funny science, because it's about the only science that I know of that people actually discuss at the dinner table. Can't remember the last time I said pass the salt, and hey, did you see the study on quantum physics this morning? So there really is just a lot of conversation around nutrition and healthy eating, and we want to kind of help folks understand what is it that you really need to know, and what are the things that you can maybe kind of push to the side and cut through that clutter. So it's always kind of beneficial to level set about nutrition itself and nutrients. So nutrition is a branch of science that looks at the role that certain substances called nutrients play in the body and relation to health. So you're probably familiar with these: carbs, fat, protein, vitamins, minerals, water, which isn't actually a nutrient, but it's also super essential to health. And also, as those question marks indicate, there's all these plant compounds that are substances in plants that they use for their own health that we're also finding have benefits for human health. And so this is really just kind of a puzzle. So if you think of it in terms of all of these pieces are very, very important. Not one is more important than another. You might need more or less of some, thinking of the puzzle pieces, different sizes, shapes, but at the end of the day, you need every single one of them to kind of complete your nutrition puzzle. And so if we look at some of the roles that these nutrients play in health, we won't go through each of these, but I think it's important just to kind of level set and understand that they're all really, really important. I'm going to go ahead and guarantee that every single one of you has either said or heard that carbs are bad for you. And it's just not the case. We need carbs to live, kind of an essential thing, right? So they are the main source of energy for our body. It's the preferred source of fuel for our brain. And there are definitely certain nuances in terms of quality carbohydrates and the types that you might choose. But frankly, almost every single food contains carbohydrates except for meat, seafood, and things like fats and oils. But carbs are very important. Same thing with fat. A lot of debate and discussion around fat, and really it plays an important role in eye health, skin health, our brains, immune systems. And certainly most people know the importance of protein in terms of maintaining muscle, but also can help you feel fuller longer, and also plays a role in immunity. So again, all of these are very essential to our health. Same story with vitamins, minerals, and water. These are just things that we need for everyday bodily functioning and kind of getting up and going. So same thing with the plant compounds. We might not necessarily need them, but we're finding that they're really beneficial. So some of you might be familiar with the substance called lycopene. It's responsible for giving tomatoes and watermelons and some other red produce there at the red color, essential for the plant's health. But we're also finding it's actually strongly connected with reduced risk and prevention of prostate cancer. And so this is all a new science. We're still learning all of this stuff. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of debate and research around these nutrients, but they're all essential. We need all of them. The types and amounts may vary, but they're all absolutely imperative to human health. Now, you may have even heard about things like the macro diet, which is really looking at your macronutrients and the exact ratio that might be right for you. Macronutrients would be the ones that we need in larger amounts, so it would be carbohydrates, protein, and fat. And really kind of digging in and finding what is the exact percentage of my calories that should be coming from these nutrients. And then there's folks that take an even deeper dive and look at their DNA and their genome and try to eat to match what it is that their specific DNA needs. So what specific types of fats do I need, and what types of starches might I have some maybe sensitivities to or should stay away from? And we don't doubt as a community that there's probably something to all of this, because we are unique individuals. So it stands to reason that maybe there's a specific makeup that's exactly right for me. It's not going to be the same makeup that's exactly right for you. And we all find this very interesting, especially those of us in the health profession and those of us that are dietitians. It's really exciting stuff to kind of see what we can learn about all of this. But unless you have the time and the energy and, quite frankly, maybe the patience or even the money to kind of look into what your exact right way is to eat, we think there's a better way to kind of think about this, particularly if you're just kind of starting out and want to, like I said, kind of cut through that clutter. And we do that through reminding ourselves that we don't eat nutrients, we eat food. So we don't sit down and say, hey, can you pass the potassium? The way that we shop and we build meals is really around food. And frankly, it's a little bit more fun to talk about food, because food is like delicious and I kind of like talking about it and eating it. So it's a little bit easier, simpler, a little bit more approachable to really talk about a pattern of eating that we know supports good health, that can get you those nutrients that you need without having to really get into the weeds about the exact percentages and amounts. So because we know folks are so bombarded with information about specifics around nutrients, we as a team at Wegmans, our nutrition team, came up with what we call our healthy eating guidelines. And these are available on our website, and they will be made available, I believe, after the webinar. And these are really just, it's an overview of the foods that we would recommend for good health. This is based on the U.S. dietary guidelines for Americans, as well as the Mediterranean diet. Why the Mediterranean? Because the population of folks in the Mediterranean just happen to enjoy a notably higher rate of health, reduced risk of disease. They're just a very healthy population, and diet is a huge piece of that. So why not do what the people do that seem to be enjoying good health, right? Now, some of these foods might not be surprising to you. Some, there's still a matter of debate, like dairy is still a matter of debate. There's certainly some debate around grains. But generally speaking, this is based in decades of research that shows the general healthy population tends to have these foods in these amounts. So we've shared an overview of the types of foods. So it's things like fruits and veggies, dairy, whole grains, nuts and seeds, certainly staying hydrated, seafood, beans and legumes, limiting your red and processed meat, eggs and poultry, and liquid oil. So an overview of some of those foods, as well as the amounts of servings per day or per week that seem to optimize health. So you could take a look at this and kind of compare the way that you eat to this and think, maybe there's some foods that I could get a little bit more of to kind of boost my health. Or you could blur your eyes and maybe you'll notice that this is really just a plant-forward approach to eating. So plant-forward really means to emphasize plant foods like those fruits and veggies and whole grains and kind of making those the center of your plate. But it's certainly not to the exclusion of other animal foods like seafood and dairy. So your plant foods are going to be really strongly associated with things like heart health, digestive health, reduced risk of type 2 diabetes, and then some of those other foods like your dairy is going to help with bone health. And certainly many of these foods actually strongly associated with reduced risk of certain cancers. And they're all associated with help with weight management. And that can be because some of them happen to be lower in calorie, like your fruits and veggies, or they might have nutrients that help you feel fuller longer, so it can help with weight management, like your fiber and whole grains, your healthy fats, and your nuts and seeds, and protein and seafood. So these guidelines are really just kind of something that we like to share with folks to level set, try to take the pressure off and not get so in the weeds about the exact nutrients and exact foods, but really just kind of looking at a pattern of eating. So what is it that you do most of the time? So that 80-20 rule, 80% of the time, are you eating in this pattern? And these guidelines may need to be modified based on special dietary needs, if you have allergies, religious preferences, and they should not be followed exactly. I don't follow these exactly. I tell everybody anytime I see them, I'm not following this to a T. I have found what works for me. And the thing we love about the guidelines is that they're not restrictive. We will never at Wegmans give you a list of foods that you cannot eat, because that is not fun, and it's also not supported by research. That the more you restrict, the more you want the things that are restricted. So the idea here is that you shift to this type of pattern, and some of those other foods that you maybe want to limit, that will happen by default. So really they can be made your own, and that probably should say they should be made your own, because each one of us is a unique individual, and as you get started with an approach to eating, you want to make it something that feels good for you, that you can maintain long term. And so you might be wondering, well, what about these types of diets, like paleo, which is known as kind of the caveman diet, where you're eating a lot more meat and seafood; keto, which is super high fat, moderate protein, low in carbs. And I just said you're supposed to eat carbs, right? They're important. So what about all these things? What about vegan? She said I could eat meat. But really what it boils down to is the approaches to diet really do run the gamut. And it comes down to personal preferences. What is it that you can maintain in the long run for yourself for the rest of your life? And is it safe for you? And truly some of these, the research in some of these newer diets is in its infancy. It's hard to stick humans in a lab, and we certainly can't stick them in there for 50 years and see what happens. So we don't know a ton about it. Keto is a great example. That was started as a medically prescribed diet for folks with, for individuals with epilepsy. But there's folks that are using it for weight management and certainly for athletic performance now. We just don't know a ton about it. So we always kind of have that caveat of, work with your doctor, make sure it's safe. But truly just understanding the types of foods that we know support good health, and then finding the way that works for you is the way that will work for you as long as it's safe. And so what we do know, so there's not really a universal right way to eat. But there are some universal healthy habits that will work for everyone. So whether you're paleo, whether you're vegan, whether you're following our guidelines, there are habits that will be universal to you no matter what you eat, what your preferences are. And the reason we like to talk about habits is because we know that what you do on a regular basis, most of the time, on a daily basis, is what is going to affect your health. And these healthy habits that we've learned, we've actually kind of learned through an employee wellness program at Wegmans, and we have based them in, we chose them based on some of the research that we were seeing about habits that are helpful for everyone. And so I want to talk about today some healthy habits that we call the big three. So these are stock for success, choose half plate healthy, and celebrate food. And like I said, we'll go into more detail about each of these, but really it's about looking at where you eat, what you eat, and how you eat. And that's really because, like I said, the research shows us that your food environment, some specific food choices, and your mindset about food can have a really huge impact on health. And it's kind of a nice rallying point for all of us. So we're not so much talking about the foods and nutrients that we could debate until we're blue in the face, but what are some habits that you can introduce into your daily life that will definitely put you on a road to better health through food? So if we start with stock for success, this is really addressing your food environment. So if you think about your home food environment, which would be your kitchen, maybe your workplace or your car. So any place that you have food and where you will be making a food decision is your food environment. So why do we care about that? Well, your environment has a huge impact on the decisions you make. And I can imagine right now it's holiday time, and I am positive that right now if I go back to the office, there's cookies somewhere. I just know it. And I have either myself or witnessed, folks going up to a tray of cookies and actually saying the words, "I'm not even hungry, but I'm going to eat this." Or maybe, "I don't even like coconut, but I'm going to go ahead and have this coconut cookie because it looks good." So essentially, I think most people can relate to that idea that, the food that is closest to you and most readily accessible, that's going to be the food you're more likely to eat. And that power of suggestion by having it in your environment kind of starts to take over your decision-making process. So the idea is, what you have on hand is the food that you're going to eat. You can't eat it if it's not there. You might eat it if it is. And I absolutely love to share the fact that my husband likes to tell people that he hasn't had chips in forever because I won't allow them in the house. And that's just because I know when we get home, if it's in the cupboard, we're going to eat it. And now that's not entirely true because I do purchase chips once in a while and I do actually like them. But most of the time you try to kind of control your environment so it works for you. And the idea is to make it as easy as possible to choose foods that support your goals. So whatever your goals may be, they might be that you're trying to eat paleo or you're trying to go vegan. It might be that you're trying to follow our pattern of eating that we kind of recommend. Or another way to look at it is you want to make it harder to choose the foods that don't support your goals. So making your environment really supportive so that when you make a food decision, you feel really good about it. That's what this habit is all about. So being in the habit of thinking about your environment and making it work for you is one of the keys to stocking for success. I'd be completely remiss working for Wegmans if I did not show you some of our favorite products for stocking for success. And quite honestly, these are foods that our own employees through our wellness program and myself, we have found success with these. They're delicious. They happen to be affordable. And if you take a look, it's just about keeping some of these things on hand. So things like whole grains that are really easily accessible, canned fruits and vegetables, frozen, proteins that you feel good about. And even having foods on hand like a pesto or a vinaigrette that just makes food taste good so you want to eat it. That's a part of your environment too, right? The way that you make food appeal to you. So you could stock your environment with foods that kind of align with our guidelines or foods that align with whatever approach to eating works for you. And also making things even easier by making them portable and having things like portion or snacking bags on hand and portioning things out ahead of time. That can be a part of making your environment work for you as well. And so the idea here, like I said, is just making it as easy as possible that you're going to be choosing foods or at least having them available so they are an option when you're making a decision about food.
Kirby, we got a couple of favorite on-hand foods.
Oh, look at this!
Salsa and popcorn, not together.
Well,
separate.
Hey, I'll try anything once. I love that. And salsa is awesome. Many of you might not realize salsa counts as a vegetable. So this counts towards your servings of fruits and vegetables. When you have something like salsa popcorn, the whole grain is one of my go-to snacks. So Ed and Samantha, you are people after my own heart. So I love that. And they're simple, right? And they're easy, affordable. So love it. So our next habit is choose half plate healthy. And before I explain what half plate healthy is, we'll have another poll question here. If you might take a guess at what percentage of Americans does not meet their recommended daily intake for fruits and veggies. So as you're thinking about that and answering that, I'll explain. Choose half plate healthy is a habit that means to fill half of your plate with fruits and veggies and half with anything else. And this is a habit that works with any meal, any snack, any occasion. It's the holidays. It can work at parties. You can use it for dessert. And it's really just a very simple way to build your plate. And so why do we look at fruits and veggies? Why are we focusing on that so much? Well, let's see if we get anybody near the correct percentage here. Over 90% of Americans don't meet the recommendations, which means that only 1 in 10 of us get the 5 recommended daily cups. I'm not even sure, quite honestly, if I'm in that 1 in 10 because it probably depends on the day or the time of year, but it's a pretty pervasive issue, I suppose, that most of us are not getting enough fruits and veggies. And it's too bad because they are the foods that are most strongly and consistently associated with reduced risk of disease and promotion of health. There's pretty much no question that fruits and veggies are bad for you. There's certainly debate within what types of fruits and veggies, but on the whole, fruits and vegetables are great food that most of us are not getting enough of. And honestly, another reason that we would focus on fruits and veggies is because it's the simplest starting point, meaning that it's got the broadest appeal. There's not really a dietary approach that I can think of that excludes them completely. Like I said, there's certainly we get in the weeds about what types of fruits and veggies. There's certain diets that call for you to avoid all nightshades or not to eat certain fruits after a certain time. You can only have kale after 11:30 at night. I mean, people can get a little specific, but generally speaking, they are they span all approaches to diet. So it's really when somebody asks me as a dietitian, what do I eat? First of all, that question makes me nervous because I have no idea, especially if I just met you, I don't know what you should eat, but I can say with absolute confidence that you should fill half of your plate with fruits and vegetables. And a reason that we love half plate healthy is because it's a really simple and easy strategy. It doesn't involve any calculating. There's no counting points or measuring, weighing grams of food. You truly just visually split any plate into half, or your bowl in half, your sandwich in half, and just make sure half of what you're eating is a fruit and vegetable. And you might have heard the saying that healthy eating is about balance, variety, and moderation, and we still think that is the case. Earlier, we talked about getting a variety of foods through our guidelines. So because not no single food provides all of the nutrients you need, so that variety is so important. And then half plate healthy really kind of covers the balance and moderation piece of it. It does that because when you fill half of your plate with fruits and veggies, you're automatically working towards something that you need, so your fruits and veggies. And just by default, it kind of controls the other half of the plate. So you're not getting too much of what you don't. So you can put whatever you want on the other half, and it's going to just by default keep the portion sizes and calories in check. And, I have a good friend who I call my half plate healthy convert because he used to say, well, what if I fill half my plate with fruits and veggies and the other half with Twinkies? Like, I don't get, how is that good for me? As well, imagine if you had a whole plate of Twinkies. This is a step in the right direction. And the idea is that, you kind of get that balance and moderation anytime you eat. And then maybe over time, you're thinking about the other half of your plate. But this is really the best starting place, especially if you really are not sure where to go with healthy eating. And it also happens to be a starting point for a lot of common health concerns. So having more fruit, building your plate this way helps with weight management because as we talked about earlier, fruits and veggies tend to be a little bit lower in calories, but having that balance and moderation also helps with weight management when you're just kind of keeping portion sizes and calories in check. But then fruits and veggies happen to have some of those really unique nutrients that are specifically associated with healthier blood pressure and increased heart health. So if you're a healthy person, or if you have a particular health condition that diet can help with, half plate healthy really is a great habit to be in. So it's really about anytime you eat is an opportunity to go half plate healthy, and just making it a habit of, before you think about anything else, thinking about the fruits and veggies that you're going to put on your plate first. And this is very similar to that plant forward approach to eating, really thinking about plant foods and building your plate around foods that we know are health promoters. And Ed Davis says yes to something. Popcorn, maybe? So this is the last of the big 3 habits, is actually my favorite. It's called Celebrate Food. And it's really just an awareness and recognition that food provides us nourishment in ways that is beyond nutrients. Food does provide nutrients that support health, but it is so much more to us. It brings us comfort, connection. It tastes good. It's fun to eat. I like eating. I don't know about you, but that's kind of why I became a dietitian. Get to talk about food all day. So food is, it can be personal. So we're thinking about the holidays right now, and I'm sure that there are certain foods that are personal to your family that you look forward to every year, and that has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not it's got vitamin K in it. It is something more. It brings us together. And this also kind of harkens back to that Mediterranean idea that the folks in the Mediterranean approach food and have a relationship with food that is really positive, and it's about connecting with others and coming together and enjoying a shared experience. That in and of itself is nourishment. It makes us feel good. And the reason I truly do like this habit so much is because I can relate to it. My own struggles with food and my relationship with food were really colored by a negative narrative that so many of us have. You say a particular food and you automatically have a feeling towards it as good or bad, and that really is not what food should be to us. That negative narrative in and of itself makes us feel bad and could have an impact on our health, but it also has this kind of cascade of effects. I'm sure many of you might be familiar, can relate to the idea that, well, I kind of messed up today, so I'll throw in the towel tomorrow, and I ate too much at that party, so I guess it doesn't matter if I have a donut this morning. So this is really about changing that inner dialogue and that narrative, and really just giving yourself permission to simply enjoy food for whatever nourishment it is providing you, and to let it be more isolated, really enjoying that experience while you're having it. Because luckily, the opposite is true as well, that if you have a positive experience with food, you'll tend to make decisions that you feel good about the next day and the next day. So whatever narrative you create around your food tends to be the one that you continue. So if you're feeling success and positivity around it, being in the habit of kind of shifting your mindset when you eat is a really great way to take a step towards good health that doesn't even really involve changing your actual food choices. And a really great way to practice this habit is through mindful eating. So hopefully you did see that we asked that you bring along a snack or a favorite food to practice in this exercise, but truth be told, there's only a little bit of eating in mindful eating. You'll notice that we're going to experience food before we even put it in our mouth. So I'll go through these steps, and if you can follow along with food, that's great. If not, just kind of think about these pieces, because these are all steps that you can take before you actually eat that will help you to be a little bit more mindful. Mindful eating really kind of stems from the concept of mindfulness, which is really about being in the moment, being aware, and doing so without judgment. And if you think about what we do, we're in a fast-paced society. We all have a lot of demands on our time, and we kind of do the opposite. We have a habit of mindless eating. I would imagine that many of you have had the experience where you get to the end of a meal and you thought, I didn't even taste that. I don't even remember what I ate yesterday. And that's because, and that's not our fault. We are very, we're moving along quickly through life, and a lot of us are eating at our desks, in our cars, and that's okay. So this is really an exercise to help, when you can, to try to be a little bit more mindful, because it can help you to celebrate food and connect to it in a way that's positive and without judgment. And so I want to share the steps of mindful eating that you can maybe start to practice. And so the first step is really just to breathe. And I'm going to breathe right now. It's very hard to just take an empty breath over a webinar. Let me just tell all of you out there. But the breath really is a very powerful tool. So before you eat, just taking one breath helps to relax you. It helps to bring you into the moment. It helps to make you aware that, yes, I am about to eat. And it helps to kind of get rid of all of those other distractions that might be demanding your attention. And so doing even one deep breath is a great practice, but really taking a few to center yourself and be in the moment is the first very simple step. And this is, I love the breath because it's, one, it's very powerful, but two, you always have it with you. And it can work for mine when you're eating, but it can also work in any situation if you just need to kind of relax and be in the moment. It's a really powerful way to kind of bring yourself down a notch and to just kind of settle. So you don't even really need food to do that, right? You can just take a nice deep breath. Your next step would be to check in. So this is with yourself. How are you feeling? Are you feeling hungry as you're about to eat? Are you full? Are you worried? Are you sad? Are you worried about holiday shopping that you haven't finished? Are you waiting for me to stop talking so you can go do that holiday shopping that you haven't finished? All of these things are fine. This check-in point is a time for you to just be aware and do so without judgment, because I've got news for you. You are a human and you have feelings, and everybody else has these feelings as well. Maybe not the same exact feelings and experiences you do, but we all have something that we bring with us and carry with us everywhere we go, including when we sit down to eat. And so this is just a moment for you to say, hello, how are you doing today? What am I feeling? And being aware. That's really bringing you into the moment too. Now, eventually, as you do this more often, that awareness might spur you into action. It might make you reflect on your experience and want to change, but that's not the idea here. It's really just to give yourself the space to experience whatever it is that you're experiencing without any type of judgment and without that negative narrative. Now, the next step is to kind of start looking at your food and describing it to yourself, really noticing it. I would imagine that many of you have had the experience where you put the food in your mouth and you didn't actually even look at the fork, and it's a miracle it even made it into your mouth, because we're really kind of multitasking all the time. So this step is about really appreciating the food itself and experiencing it with all of your senses before you actually use your sense of taste. So it's using your eyes to see what is the color, using your hands to see what's the texture, your ears, does it make a sound? You have, if you rub it between your fingers, does it make a sound? And using your nose, does it smell good? What does it smell like? What does it conjure up any memories for you? And also taking another step and describing the story of the food. How did it come to be to you? Do you know the person that grew it? Do you know the person that prepared it? There's so much to the story of food that brought it to you. And then there's shapes, there's colors, there's sounds and textures. That is all the experience of food that will happen before you even put it in your mouth. And so that is a really cool piece of it to kind of connect you to the food itself. And I have a clementine here that I'm trying to find it. So I'm looking at, and this is the only one of this clementine that is ever going to exist ever in all of history. And I'm holding it right now. And I would imagine somebody picked it off of a tree, and I can see that they grow on trees, right? Clementines grow on trees. Okay, we've got nodding people here. It's not a clementine bush, people. So I probably should know what I'm talking about. So the idea of kind of looking at, my goodness, there was a stem on this, and there was a person, and there was a truck that it was on. And, and looking at the colors, it's not an even color all the way around. And I'm touching the peel, but I know that there's a fruit inside. This is experiencing a food, and I haven't even eaten it yet. So I could tell you about a clementine before I even tasted it. And that's really one of the beauties of mindful eating, is that it really gives you a deep connection to food itself, which is something that we really, truly are missing often today because we're rushing around so much. So if any of you were trying to eat, I can't see if you did eat, so it's fine if you jumped ahead, but pretend that you are actually following along here. Now you're allowed to eat it. So the fourth step is really to enjoy your food. So yes, it's putting it into your mouth and actually eating it, but doing so slowly and paying attention. Not just, kind of, as I say, inhaling, because that's what I might be doing with my food if I'm rushing, but chewing slowly and reflecting on the flavors and what's happening as you're eating. If I were to eat this clementine, which I won't do because I don't think that's appropriate as I'm talking on a webinar, but if I were to have it in my mouth, I might be noticing that there's different textures even in my mouth. There might be some changing flavors and textures as I chew, and there might be some, juice, and I can compare this to another clementine I had, and depending on, the batch, maybe it's different than a clementine in the bag that I had earlier that was really good, and maybe this one's kind of tart. So really taking that moment to not just eat your food, but to enjoy it and experience it. That's really what mindful eating is all about. And you're doing this without judgment. You've taken a breath, you've checked in, you've connected with yourself, you've connected with the food, you've connected with the story of that food, and then you've eaten it. And that becomes an experience and a moment, and it really does help you to celebrate. And then you can reflect and say, did that provide some type of nourishment? Maybe I don't know I do know the nutrients in a clementine because that's my job, but maybe I don't know the nutrients in a clementine, but I do know that it nourished me because I was very hungry. Or maybe I went home and I was really stressed out and I ate some ice cream. Did it provide me some comfort? That's okay. That's okay if you're going to have it that way. It's not a green light to have food just because all the time. This is really about giving you some awareness so that you can connect to that experience and then maybe make some decisions about if you want to continue to be nourished in that way or not. So mindful eating does take some practice and some time. If you were to do that cycle through a whole meal, I promise you it would take you a very long time. I did it once and it's like it takes you about 45 minutes to eat. So as we're talking about having not enough time to eat, this is not something that you would expect yourself to do all the time, every time you eat. But there are some ways that you can get started with mindful eating that are also very beneficial, that can still help with that connection and that celebration of food. So it could be just a matter of making your first bite a mindful bite, or choosing one meal or snack to try to eat as mindfully as possible. Even just that idea of stopping halfway, putting your fork down, checking in, how am I feeling? Am I feeling any differently emotionally than when I started? Am I still hungry? Should I keep eating? And then expressing gratitude, especially this time of year, saying thanks to the people that are around you, the people that prepared you food, the amount of effort, time and effort that goes into bringing that food to you. This is a really great way to just kind of take a moment to celebrate food that's not going to take you, an hour. It's just going to take a moment to say thanks, or just to celebrate, taking that moment to appreciate it. Noticing, is it making you feel more comfort? Do you feel happy? And just kind of taking a moment of appreciation and celebration. These are all really great ways to get started with mindful eating. My husband asked me, what if they brought chicken wings with them? He said, well, you tell them to bring their favorite snack, and his happens to be chicken wings. He said, what if I brought chicken wings? I was like, well, that's kind of the point, so that you can totally have a chicken wing mindfully, so that chicken wing doesn't become, like a dirty word. So that's kind of the idea here. Again, not to say you should just eat piles and piles of chicken wings, but can you be more mindful when you do? So now before, we want to kind of talk about how you might put some of these things into practice. And before I kind of go into that, we've got another poll question, wondering if you might take a guess of the estimated percentage of New Year's resolutions that are actually successful. So as you're listening to this, hopefully you're finding some of it at least interesting, and maybe there's something that you might try, or pieces of these habits that you might try. But maybe you really want to make a change. And with New Year's upon us, that's why I ask, because this is a time of year that we're coming off of the holidays and thinking I really want to kind of reset. And the percentage of folks that are typically successful with the New Year's resolution is about 20%. So that means about 80% of us kind of make a goal, and then you check in with us at the end of the year and we didn't do it. Now, that does not mean that 80% of us don't care about our health or what we're not motivated. It probably means that 80% of us didn't give ourselves the plan or the structure to really support the change that we want to see. And so we talk about goal setting as kind of a 3-step process, and 80% of us are probably missing one of these steps, maybe all of them. So the first step in goal setting is actually just to kind of ask yourself, why do I want to make a change? And that's because if you have powerful motivation, that's going to carry you through, because anytime you go through a change process, or if you're trying to accomplish something, you're going to have peaks and valleys. In those valleys is where you might need a little boost, and that's where your motivation can come in. If you have powerful motivation, the reason you want to make a change is really important to you. that is kind of what gets us through some of those times where we might be feeling like we're not being that successful. So sometimes people might think, well, I just really want to, fit into a particular pair of jeans. But, I always ask folks to dig a little bit deeper. What do those jeans represent? Do they represent a feeling of accomplishment? Do you feel capable when you imagine yourself in a state where you can wear that particular pair of jeans? Do you feel like you've really empowered yourself? Are you trying to be around longer for your family? Things like that, where you want to live healthier for your family, you want to be around for your grandkids' wedding, whatever it is. That's the type of motivation that's really important to kind of recognize and acknowledge before you even set into the change process. And it really is important that it comes from within yourself. It's not that successful if you're doing it because someone else tells you that you should. So if your doctor says that you need to lose weight, or if someone said you really should work on X, Y, or Z, wanting to change for your own reasons is a really important part of goal setting. And then the next part is really to just establish, what is it that I'm trying to do? And to be specific around that. What am I trying to accomplish? So it could be, I want to lose a specific amount of weight. A lot of people might start off, especially New Year's, I think losing weight is probably the number one resolution that folks set out. And often you'll find people that will just say, I want to lose weight. Well, it's really hard to know if you're going to be successful with that if you haven't put some numbers to it. How are you going to know if you accomplished it if you didn't really think about what is a realistic amount of weight and what time frame might I do that? So establishing what is it that you really want to be different and being specific around that. So and being realistic. So if you have never run before, it's not super realistic to say, I want to run a marathon next month. So understanding what's realistic and being specific so you can kind of, keep yourself accountable. It's really important. And then the last piece is really addressing, how am I going to do it? So this is the plan. This is the plan that sometimes we don't give ourselves. This is the structure that can help lead us through the process of improvement or change or what have you. And that's where these habits come in. And if you think about it as a ladder with your goal at the top, sometimes we don't give our permission to step through the process of change in this way. If I were to say I'm going to jump to the top of a 5-story building, you would think I'm nuts. You would say you need a ladder. And the same thing is true for our own personal health. And a lot of times we don't give ourselves the time and the space to kind of do it in a way that will be sustainable and successful. So if you think about your goal, so if it's whatever it is at the top, and then these habits are kind of rungs on the ladder. There's multiple habits, multiple behaviors that are going to give you the result that you're looking for. It's not something you can do overnight. It's not something that you can necessarily do on its own. I can't go lose weight right now. I can't leave here and go lose weight. I have to do certain things, and then that will be the result of certain steps that I take. So if you think of this in terms of the habits we just talked about, say you want to lose 10 pounds by March. One of the habits you might get into is eating half-plate healthy, having a habit of most days of the week having half-plate healthy dinners. This is where you would kind of plug those habits in and see, how you might do that more specifically. Again, we can be very general about our goals. I want to lose weight. Well, how are you going to lose weight? I'm going to eat better. So these are things that if you don't give some specificity to, it's going to be very difficult to keep yourself accountable and know if you've been successful. And so half-plate healthy might be one way that you do that. It could be making sure that I'm going to go and, I'm going to stock my kitchen with foods that support my health goals. So that's how those habits that we talked about could play in here. And now habits don't happen overnight. They are a result of multiple behaviors, right? You started by brushing your teeth the first time you did it. It was a behavior, and now hopefully it's a habit for most. I hope everybody has a habit of brushing their teeth, but when you learn as a child, it's not quite a habit. It does take some time. So there's one more step that you can take to make it easier to adopt a habit, because there's a reason that's not your habit now. There's a couple things that you might want to do to just kind of put you on the road to forming a habit. And that would be through commitments. So weekly commitments that you might make to yourself, really like 1 to 2 small things that you can do and feel really successful about that make it easier. So if you're fine, I want to, be physically active. I want to have physically active 5 days a week. There's some reason that you're not right now, and it might be easily addressed through commitments. So it might be every time I get home, I want to take my walk, but I can't find my clothes. So a commitment might be, I'm going to put my clothes out so that when I get home, I can go for my walk. So the idea with commitments is it's not so much practicing that habit, it's getting rid of some of those obstacles, clearing the way so that it can become a behavior, can become a habit. And making them specific and measurable so that you know you did it is a really great way to kind of celebrate successes. So if I say, well, I didn't walk 5 times last week, I don't really feel that great about it. But if I say, hey, I got on a couple of walks and I made sure that I put my clothes out, now I feel good. There's something to celebrate there. And then that kind of leads to other successes. Examples of how you might do that with the habits that we talked about today. You are all invited to an absolutely fabulous fictional party on Saturday because it's the holidays. And you might be thinking, well, this is like the worst time to try to institute a new habit for myself. But hopefully you see it could be the best time. So if you were maybe trying to make a commitment because you want to be in a better habit of stocking for success or creating a supportive food environment, maybe you're coming to this party and you're going to bring a dish to pass that has whole grains in it, just so you have the option there. So you know that there's at least one thing in there that supports your goals. So that's stocking for success. It's a small commitment. It's not a big, heavy lift. It's one little thing you can do for yourself. Or maybe I want to work on half plate healthy and I'm going to have a half plate of fruit with my desserts. I did put I made it plural because who are we kidding? I'm not going to stop at one cookie. So every time I have a cookie, I'm going to have it with a half plate of fruit. Again, this is a small thing you can do that will put you on the road to establishing that habit. And then maybe I'm really looking forward to this particular appetizer. There's about 1 million that are coming to mind that I'm looking forward to over the holidays for my own family. Appetizers are actually my favorite. So maybe I'm going to have those appetizers, but I'm going to make a small commitment to myself that I'm just going to take one deep breath and say a silent thank you for the people around me. So that's me trying to practice the habit of celebrating food. And so, being the holidays, a lot of people might say this is the absolute worst time to practice this, but it's really, I think, the best time because it can show you that there's no restriction involved here. In each of these, I'm going to a party, I'm eating food, I'm having dessert, I'm having my appetizer. I'm just doing it in a slightly different way that it will make me feel better. And I really have not said anything about these are the foods you must eat. These are the foods you cannot eat. Go to your holiday parties, make small commitments to yourself, put yourself on a road to establishing habits that will last a lifetime. So when you come up on the holidays, you go to a party, or it's in the middle of the summer, whatever it is, these things don't have to take a hiatus. This is something that you can kind of, put into your everyday life. And you can start in the holidays. You could start with the new year. You could start not at all because maybe you just you're not feeling it right now. And so really what we're trying to get at is that these habits are what impact your health. If you look at your environment, you're getting fruits and veggies. That's like the only time I'm going to ever tell somebody anything about what they should eat, fruits and veggies, and having a positive mindset. Those types of habits are really, really, really powerful and impactful. And if you really want to start trying to fold these into your everyday to make a change, then maybe thinking about those 3 steps of goal setting can be helpful. And it's truly about kind of moving out of food fear and into food freedom. And actually somebody just gave me a hat that says eat freely. And I love it because I'm like, yes, that is all about me. I should have worn it. But that really is what we want to get at, get out of the weeds, out of the fear, and get some freedom through habits. And then you might just kind of settle on a way of eating that works for you that will last a lifetime. So one last poll question, just kind of curious if, which of those big 3 habits you might try during the holidays. And I think with that, I'll say thank you.
Yeah.
And I think we have some potential time for questions.
We do have some time for questions as you're all finishing up that last poll. If you do have questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box. We were having a conversation. First, I should say that Kirby sat here before we started and watched me very unmindfully eat my snack. I was starving, but it was an interesting webinar because that is probably the one thing that I know we do in my family worse than anyone else. I have a 20-year-old son. He shows up at the dinner table and just dives into the food. It takes him maybe 4 minutes to eat it. And then he's gone off to do something else. So I know that is definitely something that we are not doing. Before we did start the webinar, we were having kind of an interesting conversation about water. And I wonder, Kirby, if you can talk a little bit about Water, are we all supposed to be drinking, gallons of water every day?
Sure.
What's the deal with water?
Sure. It is interestingly one of the top questions that I get. And really, so first of all, like hydration needs are going to vary based on the individual. There are some recommendations out there for how much that you should drink. But generally speaking, most experts find that we are pretty good at staying hydrated as long as we drink when we're thirsty. So there are some other, signs if you're dehydrated or if you need to drink more. But generally speaking, if you are paying attention and you're drinking when you're thirsty, that will keep you hydrated. But yeah, hydration is super important because if you're not hydrated, you might notice that you're going to be getting fatigued at the end of the day. Maybe you have a headache, and you could attribute those things to like work was hard today. But a lot of times it's because maybe you didn't drink enough. And it's one of those things that I think is harder for people to stay on top of. So things like keeping your water bottles nearby, having options that you're excited to drink, like putting some flavor in your water is a really great way to stay hydrated. But yeah, we should all be staying hydrated because it's essential. And interestingly, sometimes the feelings of thirst and hunger can be confused. So if you're feeling hungry, you might actually be thirsty. So that's another way that anytime you're hungry to just take a sip of water and make sure you stay ahead of dehydration. So.
And you said earlier that coffee counts.
Oh, it sure does. Yes.
Even caffeinated.
Yes, this is a common myth that caffeine, like you'll find in coffee and tea, is dehydrating. It does have a mild diuretic effect, which means that it causes you to lose fluid. But for most people, particularly if you're already a coffee drinker, you've kind of established a threshold for that caffeine, and it does hydrate more than it dehydrates. But of course, then you might ask, like, well, what else are you putting in that coffee? Because you might want to be, making smart hydration choices. So things like, the added sugars in there, that's really more of the concern with coffee, not the caffeine. So
yeah, if you're cutting it with Pittsburgh dairy eggnog, you might want to rethink that a little bit.
Yeah, but unless it's nourishing you in some particular way, then maybe just have the eggnog.
I find that eggnog actually very nourishing, but that is a whole other topic. So.
I love it.
All right. Well, terrific. Thank you so much. And we did have a couple people ask about, and I think we can commit to doing this when we send out the recording. We will provide your Wegmans chart that you had at the beginning.
Yep.
And then maybe also those 4 steps.
Sure, for mindful eating.
Yeah,
absolutely.
For mindful eating. And I think we will go ahead and attach those to the recordings when we send this out to you. So keep an eye out for that. So I think we don't seem to have any more questions. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. If you do have additional questions, you can email them to ritalum@rit.edu, and we will go ahead and direct those questions to Kirby. All participants today will receive a recording. It'll take us probably about a week to 2 weeks to get that out to everyone. So keep an eye out. Actually, we may go a little quicker because we're going to run into the holidays here. So we'll see if we can make that come out a little more quickly. Kirby, thanks so much for joining us today, and thank you to our audience as well. This is actually our last webinar for 2019. We will be taking a break for the holidays, being mindful of our eating, of course. And we are also recognizing that it is RIT's semester break. And so we will be out of the office through January 2nd, 2020. When we come back, we hope you will join us for our January webinars. The first one is welcoming Margie Oakes, the Director of Marketing and Business Development in the John D. Romey Center for Quality and Applied Statistics at RIT. Margie's webinars are always very much appreciated. And in January, she will be discussing incremental quick process improvement. And then later in the month, this may be very interesting to some of our alumni. We will be joined by RIT's Chief Marketing Officer, John Trierweiler, RIT's Head of Communications, Bob Finnerty, and, I'm so sorry, and Ken Sageball, who is Associate Vice President of Marketing. And they are going to be talking about RIT's recent rebranding and how it is building national awareness and shaping perceptions about the university. This is also going to include some conversations about how the RIT alumni play a role in building that brand. So I hope you will all join us for that. Excuse me. From everyone at RIT, we do wish you a happy and safe holiday season. Please go ahead and exit the webinar by closing your live storm window, and do let us know what you thought of the webinar through a brief survey that you will receive via email. Thank you all, and have a great day.